New exclusive videos are waiting for you on Boosty. You can support me and follow the link to subscribe to Boosty. Enjoy watching. Description: The blind Uchiha and the abandoned Jinchuriki. One-on-one against the world, each other, and themselves. Chapter 12. Minato finished checking the last report for the day and leaned back tiredly in his chair. His stiff back ached unpleasantly, his eyes were watering from reading for so long, and his temples were shooting with a dull pain. He had managed to sort out the documents that had accumulated during the day completely, but tomorrow his desk would be covered with a pile of new scrolls again. The dry season was always the most popular for shinobi. Civilians stopped farming and went on trips, asking for protection. Traders actively traveled, trying to visit as many settlements as possible before the roads washed out again. The frequency of clashes with other shinobi on the country's borders increased. Nuke-nin and roadside robbers became more active, conflicts broke out in taverns, orders came in to collect medicinal herbs and insects. And with all this, the shinobi's reports became less and less clear and readable. The heat and constant fatigue took their toll. Parsing this scribble turned into excruciating torture, and calculating profits and expenses into sophisticated mockery. There were assistants, of course, but Minato had gotten used to controlling everything himself over the years. Not because he didn't trust, he was just trying to fill every minute of his free time with work. The man stood up, stretched, and walked over to the open window. Twilight was gradually falling on Konoha. Street lamps were lit, ragged shadows drew bizarre patterns on the ground, fireflies flickered here and there. People were finishing up their business and hurrying home, smiling contentedly at each other, exchanging jokes, agreeing to meet later in cafes and bars. The Hokage had nowhere to rush. After Kushina's death, he sold the old house. He couldn't sleep, eat, or think there. There were too many reminders of the loss. The comfortable leather sofa where they had spent hundreds of happy evenings hugging, the light wallpaper with a small flower kami-sama, how long they had argued over the color scheme, the cozy kitchen that always smelled of freshly baked goods. Kushina loved to bake sweet desserts from rice flour, and always greeted her husband from missions with some new delicacy. She loved bright colors. Although she was embarrassed by her copper-red hair, she loved loud laughter and gentle, melodic music. She often sang when she was doing housework, danced driving you crazy with the smooth curve of her hips, smiled brightly and sincerely. Thanks to her, the whole house smelled of dried lavender and holly, subtle notes of sakura and delicate violet. An incomparable, unique aroma that instantly evokes deep blue eyes and the softness of chiseled hands. An amazing woman. Irreplaceable. Kushina dreamed of a child. She spent a long time persuading her husband to take the decisive step, bought magazines on suitable topics, and furnished the nursery to her taste. A small pendulum crib with a light, translucent canopy, plush bears and foxes lovingly placed throughout the room, a soft carpet from the country of stone green, long pile, covering the entire floor of the small room. She taught him fairy tales and lullabies, picked out flannel diapers and tiny funny sandals. During her pregnancy, his wife had read somewhere that she absolutely had to knit something for the future baby. Was it her fiery temperament that would take on such a tedious task? Minato remembered how colorful skeins of wool, knitting needles, and specially purchased magazines with patterns were flying all over the house. He had to catch his furious wife and kiss her, assuring her that their son would be happy without stupid superstitions, and then reproach himself for many years. Maybe if he had picked up those needles and tried to knit those stupid booties himself, their life would have turned out differently. There was no point in guessing now. My wife has been gone for 13 years, my son for the same amount of time. And Minato is probably gone too, only Yandame remains. Hokage. Kushina was his meaning, his guiding star in life, the only woman he had ever loved. Not once in all these years had the thought of tying himself to someone else crossed his mind. Did young Namikaze understand what his election as Hokage could lead to? What would he have to sacrifice for the sake of this title? What would he lose? More likely yes than no. He was always serious and collected, always took responsibility for his own and other people's lives, always strived only forward. He realized what kind of world they lived in, participated in military actions more than once, was not afraid to act. He loved Konoha and wanted to protect it at any cost. Perhaps he was simply too young. Minato was ready to pay for his mistakes, he just did not know that life would demand such interest. The years have smoothed out those character traits that threw him into battle impulsively. Namikaze learned to send others to their deaths, to make decisions that affected the lives of hundreds, to choose between what was desired and what was right. He always realistically assessed his strengths and capabilities, did not disdain to ask others for advice, but made conclusions based only on his own inferences. This was his path, his choice. The Hokage left the office, locked the door with the usual Fuin barrier, and dismissed the ANBU on duty. After some hesitation, he decided not to move home by technology. He wanted to walk along the streets familiar from childhood, to plunge into the bustle flowing through the arteries of Konoha, to feel a little alive. The village was still awake, the signs of roadside cafes were welcomingly lit, people were walking, tired from the daytime heat. The wind was scattering the trash that had been piled up during the day along the sidewalks. At night, the street cleaners would come out and clean everything up. Minato bowed to passers-by, smiled routinely and politely declined offers to have a cup of sake. Subordination had not yet been abolished, although sometimes he really wanted to. The new Namikaze house was located next to the Hokage residence, and was half the size of the previous one. 2 rooms, a kitchen with an eternally empty refrigerator, a futon. Nothing extra, nothing, homey, distinguishing a living space from a hotel room occupied by guests, only for the night. Of his personal belongings, there was only a half-empty closet with clothes, a box of kunai, and an album with photographs. The cleaning lady who came twice a week often grumbled, saying that the Hokage's house looked like a crypt, and sometimes cooked something for dinner for the negligent boss. Today, she was probably there too, but most likely she had already left. I wonder if there was any food in the house. He was not hungry, but he would not refuse tea. Minato climbed the creaky steps, opened the lock and walked into the hallway. He took off his shoes, took off his Hokage cloak, hanging it on a nail driven into the door, went into the kitchen, turning on the light. Naruto was sitting on the wide windowsill, leaning his forehead against the glass and looking out onto the street, clutching a 3-pronged kunai. Teach me to outpace time. The clock ticked quietly, counting down the first hour of the night. An aluminum spoon tapped on the bottom of the plate, paper rustled. While Naruto ate the soup prepared by the caring housekeeper, Minato read the report, supplemented by a crooked boyish handwriting. Strange feelings were born in his chest: pride, obsessed with rage, fear, and admiration. It seemed that the mission of the 7th team was successful, and they returned alive, and the honor of Konoha remained unstained, but everything was somehow too close to the edge. Naruto often walked on the edge in his life, looking into the abyss, and this time, for the first time, death did not look away. The Hokage reread the last lines again, paying special attention to a specific word, and looked at his son. Show me, sharply, harshly, without the right to refuse. An order, not a request. Naruto put down the spoon and activated the Rinnegan. The circles spread across the smooth surface of the water, confirming that everything written was true. What else was hidden in this child? Should he develop his power or, on the contrary, slow down, lock him away until a certain time, wait until his view of the world becomes broader and his psyche becomes more stable? The man sighed and rubbed his tired eyes, making a decision. You will have access to all documents in the secret archives that contain information about the Rinnegan. Sensei Jiraiya will not return to Konoha for at least 8 months. The Chunin exam is planned for 6 months from now, and if you pass it, you will be able to receive a long-term training mission. Otherwise, I will not be able to justify the removal of the Jinchuriki from the village to the advisors. Learning Rinnegan techniques under close supervision is not the best idea. Will that suit you? That's not all. Naruto started working with his spoon again, continuing to furtively drill Namikaze with a heavy look. Will you teach me? Minato narrowed his eyes, his fingers tapping out an intricate rhythm on the tabletop. You want to learn my movement technique. For what? If I had been faster, Sasuke wouldn't have been hurt. Minato smiled wryly. At one time, this technique did not help me save the woman I loved. Naruto snorted stubbornly, but did not take his eyes off. He had already decided everything for himself. He was ready to go to the end of his intended goal. Kushina came to mind again, proudly straightening her shoulders and striding forward. The man nodded to his thoughts, walked around the table and put his hand on his son's shoulder. The mark is placed with one touch. Sasuke folded the Katon seals and tried to change her vision like there, on the bridge. It already worked the first time, although at first it was difficult to tune into the right wave. The degree of chakra concentration in the eyes, and concentration, and emotional mood were all important. The fireball turned out to be twice as big as planned. The girl rubbed her burnt cheeks, glued pieces of gauze folded several times and soaked in a healing solution to them with a plaster, and took kunai out of her bag. A sharp run, a jump, a somersault in the air, and sharp blades ripped through space, flying to the target. No less than 8 targets, you need to hit the center of each. 6 kunai enter precisely into the red center, but 2 clang dully, bouncing off the surface and falling into the thick grass. Sasuke curled her lips, exhaled, and went to collect the weapons. We need to try again. She can see all 8 targets, and the flight of the kunai. What's the problem? Not a strong enough swing. Sharingan. After the mission in the Land of Waves, Sasuke looked at her changed eyes in the mirror for a long time, trying to understand whether she was happy about another confirmation of her belonging to the Uchiha clan or not. Her feelings were ambivalent. On the one hand, she received her own power, taken not from Naruto, on the other a whole bunch of additional problems. She did not have access to any clan techniques, did not have a suitable teacher, and did not have the slightest desire for her pseudo-relatives to find out about her new abilities. Of course, she could have turned to Kakashi, but the sensei stubbornly avoided the girl. During missions, he kept himself aloof and distant. Immediately after completing and submitting reports, he disappeared in an unknown direction, and it was completely impossible to reach him on the street or at home. Was he embarrassed by his defeat on the bridge in the first serious battle the children saw? Was he remembering something from the distant past? Was he experiencing his first pedagogical failure? Sasuke had heard that Kakashi had never had any other students before. The girl didn't know what the problem was, but it was starting to irritate her. A month and a half had passed. It was time to calm down. Since Naruto began his training with the Hokage, they almost stopped seeing each other. Uzumaki's days were filled with missions, reading archival documents, and individual training. In the evenings, when the Hokage finished with the daily routine, paired training began: techniques, combat strategy, general physical training, and the elements. Naruto returned well after midnight, tired, squeezed out, incapable not only of heart-to-heart talks, but even of the bare minimum of eating, taking a shower, changing into pajamas. He threw off his clothes and fell into bed, falling asleep before his head even touched the pillow. At 5 a.m, he jumped up, as if by an alarm clock, rushed to the bathroom, swept away the food prepared the night before, and everything began again. Missions, archives, training. Without the noisy, fidgety, sometimes clumsy Uzumaki, the house was empty and sad. No one threw things around that the girl constantly tripped over, no one shouted, entering into another senseless argument, no one distracted her from Gray's sad thoughts. Sasuke was desperately bored. She missed his familiar voice, slightly rough jokes, that warmth that was always there. And at the same time, she understood that she was to blame for everything. If she were stronger, if she had not lost to the ice mirrors, then everything in their life would have remained the same. Naruto would not rush forward so desperately now, would not drive himself at a crazy, exhausting pace, would not turn his brain and joints inside out in an attempt to never allow failure again. He always wanted to protect her, and now this mania reached its peak. Sasuke was ashamed of her weakness, tried to overcome it, but so far it was not working out very well. The girl returned home, took a shower, and headed to the kitchen, starting to cook dinner. The thoughts in her head were sluggish, clumsy, too viscous. Her hands mechanically peeled and chopped vegetables, poured oil into the frying pan and lowered boiled noodles into it, added hot spices and soy sauce. Fish or meat? Probably pork. Naruto needed protein. And it would be more filling. It was unknown whether he had eaten anything today. Sakura taught her how to cook. Sasuke didn't have a mother who would explain many things and teach what every girl needs to know in everyday life. Cooking and sewing, cosmetics and hairpins, choosing colors for everyday and festive outfits, ways to care for skin and hair. Changes that happen to the body due to growing up. Incomprehensible emotions caused by boys. In the absence of Naruto, Sasuke had to communicate a lot with the pink-haired girl, who opened the door to the world of femininity for her and patiently explained what distinguishes girls from boys in addition to purely physical differences. The new experience was interesting, a little embarrassing and extremely useful. It can't be said that the girls became close friends, but Sasuke began to understand Haruno and her other peers much better. They were not stupid and spoiled, they just grew up in different conditions? Sasuke, I'm home. As always, through the window. What can you do with him? You're early today. For good, or will you run away again? The brunette took out plates and forks, setting the table. She thoughtfully looked at the result and added a napkin holder, salt and pepper shakers. Dropped in for an hour, had a bite to eat, and washed up. Then I'll run on, there's still a ton of things to do. Uzumaki walked into the kitchen, chewing an apple as he went. The girl snorted. Will you eat? Yeah, I'm really hungry. Naruto threw the core into the trash and sat down at the table, rubbing his hands in anticipation. And you, too, I guess, holding your dijutsu for an hour without a break, while combining taijutsu and ninjutsu. Is it just me, or have you become much faster? Where are you from? Fuyu turned around, staring at her neighbor in amazement. Her face lit up with a guess. Dobe! You were following me? Yeah, Naruto smiled contentedly. My father made me, as part of the training. Father? Well, we have to call him something? Naruto was embarrassed and stared at the center of the table. For the first time this word rolled off his tongue, and so unexpectedly easily. Exo. The girl smiled slyly, took a plate, and began to serve an early dinner. Udon noodles, sweet pepper, beans, and meat. It seemed to have turned out beautifully. She put the plate in front of her neighbor and sat down opposite with her portion. Uzumaki continued to hypnotize the table and turn red with his ears. Was he embarrassed that he now had a blood family, and she still didn't? Stupid. It was great that at least one adult appeared in his life, ready to teach him, help him at least with advice, guide him. Sasuke had never met the fourth anywhere except the Hokage's office, but one day he still came to their home. He carried Naruto on himself after their first training session together. Both had miscalculated their strength, and the youngest was unable to move independently. Sasuke didn't know what Namikaze had told his son, but a day later Naruto had fixed the broken chair, finally nailed the shelf in the bathroom that Sasuke had long asked for, and replaced the creaky boards in the bottom of the bed. So, have you made any progress? Naruto shook himself and started eating, dropping the embarrassing topic. Figured out how to use the Sharingan? Partially. I learned to copy techniques by spying on others at the training grounds, the girl giggled. It's especially funny to watch the two weirdos from the 6th training ground. You've seen them, they wear strange green suits and smile all the time. Leon Sensei guy? Yeah. I didn't even know what kind of possibilities taijutsu holds. I'm not sure I can repeat even half of their techniques, but I've adopted some of them. Cool. Naruto picked up a hot piece of meat with his chopsticks and stuffed it into his mouth. Will you teach me later? We'll see. Don't talk with your mouth full. Uzumaki swallowed the food and washed it down with a glass of milk. What about your genjutsu? Fuyu frowned, her mood instantly changing from benevolent to aggressively negative. I have enough bells. Sasuke, leave me alone. The girl slammed the empty plate into the sink and left the kitchen. Naruto winced. Anyway, the main power of the Sharingan is not copying techniques. After the Yondaime opened the archives for Naruto, the previously quiet, clean and strict room turned into something like a dump. Here and there you could find sheets of paper covered with writing, half-eaten sandwiches, broken pencils, and empty plastic juice bottles. All the boxes with documents were mixed up in a chaotic order, breaking the usual alphabetical indexes. Scribbled diagrams and formulas appeared on the walls. The floor was covered with secret scrolls unrolled to their full length. An accelerated training course in the Uzumaki style 3 clones at once wrote, read, and crammed something, moving between the pyramids they had created, while the original enthusiastically practiced seals. The shinobi who came for their needs quietly cursed through their teeth, but admitted it was much better this way. Because initially there were 12 clones, and the noise level significantly exceeded the permissible. The tyranny of the demon who suddenly reached for knowledge was stopped by Yondaime, who once showed up at the archive in the middle of the working day and gave the restless child a dressing down. From a long lecture, Naruto realized that such a number of clones would not only not contribute to the rapid assimilation of information, but on the contrary, would slow down the process. In other words, after the clones disappeared, such a mess would form in the original's head that he would not be able to figure out what his copies were doing here at all. The boy heated, dispelled most of the fair-haired assistants, and again stared at the scrolls with fuinjutsu. According to the official version, he gained access to the archive precisely because of them. The last representative of the Uzumaki clan in Konoha had to fill in the gaps in his education in this area and become an indispensable specialist for the village. The village leadership approved this wording. Everyone remembered Mito's protective barriers. It wouldn't be a bad thing if a Jinchuriki learned to create something like that on their own. Konoha could use some protection like that. About the Rinnegan, Minato wisely kept quiet. There was a serious conflict brewing among the village leadership, and it was worth keeping some aces up their sleeve. Naruto opened another scroll containing information about the Rinnegan and thoughtfully bit his lip. It seemed like a lot of information had been collected, but it was all somehow superficial. No specifics, as if you were reading a novel with a lot of literary water, containing only hints of the plot. Nevertheless, even such reading was useful. The boy sighed, took a pencil and underlined the line in the document that interested him with 2 stripes. The student extremely quickly learns techniques based on the use of ninjutsu, without experiencing any visible depletion of chakra. Perhaps this is due to the special properties of the Rinnegan, although I cannot say that there is no endurance typical of all Uzumaki representatives. However, the wearer's body still receives a colossal load when using 2 or more techniques at the same time. There is no probability of a fatal outcome, but the rest is illegible. The lines merge together. Apparently, a drop of water got into it. Naruto cursed and looked at Itachi, who entered the archive. Is it possible to disclose the information received to Sasuke? On the one hand, she is smart and reasonable. She will surely be able to notice what Uzumaki missed and help figure it out. On the other hand, she is stubborn and sometimes impulsive, especially in connection with her slight stall in mastering the Sharingan. She will definitely try to apply her new knowledge about the Rinnegan in practice. What if it kills her? What if something else is needed to use the Rinnegan, besides the very fact of having this Dijitsu? Something that Naruto has, but Sasuke does not? It cannot be belonging to the Uzumaki clan. Rakuto-san and was the same ancestor for the Uchiha, as well as for the Whirlpool clan. It cannot be a Biju. Nagato was not a Jinchuriki. What's the secret? Itachi shrugged slightly, expressing his typical disapproval of the mess Naruto had made in the archive. The blonde bit his pencil. Uchiha was supposed to be a genius, wasn't he? And loyal to his father. Minato told the story of his eldest son Fugaku, not considering it necessary to hide it from Naruto. It couldn't be said that the younger one approved of such relations between relatives, but deep down he was forced to admit he understood Itachi. He himself couldn't do the same. He would have tried to find another way out until the last, but there was definitely logic in the actions of the older brother Sasuke, both in relation to his own clan and in relation to his sister. Naruto can't reveal the secrets of the Rinnegan to Sasuke until he figures it out himself, but she still has to move forward. The Chunin exams are coming up. Black Eyes bore a hole into the back of the only available native Sharingan bearer. Why would or would not Itachi looked at the girl throwing kunai around the training ground and squinted intently, remembering his conversation with the Hokage's son that had happened the previous evening. Only the reflexes he had developed over the years had saved him then. Trained by the yondaime, Naruto was becoming faster and more dangerous every day. But there was no new information about his abilities after completing his training and being assigned the rank of genin. The Hokage ordered the ANBU surveillance to be lifted. 10 kunai with explosive seals attached to them pierced the place where Itachi had been standing just a few moments ago. His eyes automatically became covered with a film, his tomo began to spin, twisting into one line, and a katana appeared in his hands. The explosion thundered at the moment, when Itachi had already touched the ground with his feet at a safe distance from the attack. The boy only bared his teeth at the unkind look thrown at him, and the fox under the seal growled angrily. Manjikyu revealed all the secrets kept by the child's body. A slight wave of surprise passed along the edge of consciousness. Why hadn't even a thin thread of connection between the Biju and the technique that tamed it begun to form? It was clear that the seal tightly bound both the bearer and the sealed one, but it was still quite strange. Uchiha stood in a stance, not knowing what to expect from the restless Jinchuriki, but the boy surprised. He continued to sit on the tree branch from where he had launched the kunai, carelessly swinging his legs and not taking any action. Itachi had already decided to scold the playful boy, but Naruto was first, and all the words got stuck in his throat. Sasuke received the Sharingan. It didn't matter that the girl's eyes had previously belonged to another person. The Sharingan was born in the heart. The eyes were just a reflection of those inner experiences that the Uchiha clan experienced when they feared for their loved ones, sought to reunite with loved ones, or lost someone who was a part of their soul. It was foolish to hope that Sasuke, who had seen the light, would escape the curse of her clan. Itachi never considered the Sharingan a blessing. With the power came too much pain, disappointment, and loss. And an irrepressible, corrupting and distorting pride. Surprisingly, Uzumaki turned out to be very tactful for his age. He did not try to get into the interfamily relationships of the Uchiha clan, did not blame anyone, and did not insist on anything. He simply offered a simple and safe way out of the impasse into which Itachi had driven himself to be a little closer to his sister, to bring her benefit, at the same time not causing internal pain. Without rushing and without being impudent, enter the inner circle, get to know each other a little better, without promising or imposing anything. Give them both the opportunity to gain an understanding of someone else's point of view and draw their own conclusions. Itachi watched the girl's next attempt to hit the targets and smoothly landed on the grass behind her. The swing is too strong. Your actions should be softer and smoother, your hand should be more relaxed, focused not on the target, but on the flight itself. The voice sounded calm and confident. This is exactly how Itachi himself was lectured in his time. Sasuke turned around and quickly jumped away from the uninvited guests by 10 meters. She narrowed her eyes warily, examining her advisor. My name is Uchiha. Itachi. I will be your temporary teacher. The girl bared her teeth. Why do you think I need a teacher from the Uchiha? No one else will tell you how to develop the Sharingan anyway. The guy bowed his head and looked closely into the blue eyes. I don't care, I'll figure it out myself. The girl turned her back and resolutely headed towards the exit from the training ground. Itachi sighed and squatted down. The world around the two turned black and red. Look, Sasuke, I'm not an enemy. I serve in the Yondaime's personal guard. Hokage. Uzumaki sent me. Naruto. Sasuke froze and looked at her interlocutor with distrust. Naruto. Damn stubborn ram. Still found her a personal sensei. Chapter 13. A fiery wave of Katon passed along the taut fishing line, scorching the delicate leaves and bark of the tree. A snow-white electric discharge flew right after it. An explosion thundered, a flash of light, a water dragon, created from a small dirty puddle, soared into the sky. The small shadow jumped to the side, somersaulted several times in the air and froze, warily looking around. Flexible, dangerous, reminiscent of a whip, any breath of wind could throw it into the next attack. Nimble fingers folded another seal, dispersing the smoke with the element of air. Sakura sighed in admiration and leaned back on the prickly blanket, stopping her observation. After all, Sasuke is incredible. A small clearing, located just behind the fenced-in iron training ground, was flooded with sunlight and warmth. A large blanket with a picnic basket was spread out on the silky fresh grass. There were several scrolls sealing cold water and mint ice cream, a straw hat, and a snow-white t-shirt. A stream was quietly babbling nearby, an ideal place for a weekend walk and easy sparring. Sakura stretched blissfully and thoughtfully looked at the clear sky, watching the white lumps of clouds. Good. No missions, no training, no constant teasing. Today was dedicated exclusively to rest. Well, at least for her, as practice showed, Naruto and Sasuke did not know how to rest. Their whole life resembled an endless race. A black-haired guy, whose face was covered by an ANBU mask, landed silently next to him. Having fun? Yeah. And what's the score? So far 7 or 8 in Sasuke's favor. A satisfied chuckle was heard. Sakura had long since gotten used to this strange, silent teacher Sasuke. Haruno didn't know why he had taken on the task of teaching an orphan girl, but she admitted that the young Uchiha was a much better sensei than Kakashi. More meticulous, demanding, and interested. Sasuke lit up every time he showed up and offered to conduct another training session. 4 out of 5 elements, close combat, ranged attack, genjutsu. Fuyu had progressed amazingly fast. Over the last 4.5 months, she had managed to copy and replicate half of her teacher's arsenal, develop her own enemy detection technique, and almost double her chakra reserves through daily training and meditation. It wasn't even progress, but a rapid leap upward, as if Sasuke had finally found her purpose. The clans. Sakura had long suspected that Sasuke had a direct connection to the Uchiha clan. The initially vague suspicions were confirmed by the awakened Sharingan, the ability to instantly adapt to any opponent, and a completely unique fighting style. It was not entirely clear which branch of the clan had rejected the girl, but it was no longer important. Special training with Itachi revealed Sasuke's potential in a completely different perspective. Not a purely clan approach to training, not an emphasis on the ability to control an opponent with one glance, something completely new and many times more dangerous. Sakura sighed. She was envious. She herself could not boast of any particular successes. Her chakra control had become even higher and stronger. Joint training with the team had slightly increased the speed of her movements. Lonely evenings spent reading books had significantly strengthened her knowledge of theory. In general, that was all that the pink-haired girl had managed to achieve recently. Haruno began to think more and more often about her place in Team Number 7. Where are the Hokage and Kakashi? The interlocutor did not let him sink into despondency. Sakura propped herself up on her elbows and waved lazily to the side. The guy's always overly serious face lit up with a fleeting smile. The girl followed his gaze and couldn't help but giggle. 2 grown-up, serious and responsible shinobi were sitting on a tree and excitedly commenting on the fight, each rooting for their favorite. Kakashi was betting on Naruto, the Hokage on Sasuke. A flash, and Uzumaki evened the score, causing a storm of indignation from the village head. Grown men playing for money. The silhouette started to the sides, preparing for a new round. Uzumaki's joyful cries were heard. Kami-sama, like a child, every emotion spilled out in cries. Sakura smiled with the corners of her lips. Naruto was also incredible. Not a demon, a human. Haruno believed in this fact back there, on the bridge of the Land of Waves, and accepted it with all her heart. Neither the cruelty shown by the boy in that terrible mission, nor his strange chakra, nor the mysterious Rinnegan matter. At that moment, when he decided that Sasuke was dead, he emanated such monstrous pain and doom that everything that was happening became for Sakura only a logical ending, a fair impact, the only possible solution to the situation. Only at that moment the pink-haired girl was able to see behind the seemingly stupid shell the whole essence of this strange boy. His kindness, selflessness, desire to protect the people close to him. She managed to rejoice that she was on their list and not an enemy, to be ashamed of her own narrow-mindedness, to experience inner understanding and disappointment. And at some point, she simply believed that Naruto's dream was real. Sakura remembered her amazement when she learned that Naruto was personally training the Hokage at his request. Then the Uzumaki's impudence amazed and angered the girl. This idiot decided to distract the head of the village from important matters for the sake of a whim. Not even a chunin yet, but already aiming for the major league, did not understand the knowledge that Kakashi-sensei could give him, and is trying to master an incomparably higher level. Idiot! Sasuke was right to call him a moron. Sakura remembered perfectly well the lectures that explained what could end up happening to an unprepared shinobi if his channels were overstrained, powerful and destructive techniques were used, and unsystematic muscle loads were used. Destruction of ligaments. Paralysis. Rupture of chakra channels without the possibility of recovery. Destruction of the brain and blindness. Haruno, of course, trusted the Hokage, knew that he had taught genin in his time, hoped that Namikaze-sama would not burden her unexpected student too much, but Naruto was not liked in the village. Sakura did not know the true reasons, but the fact remained a fact. Uzumaki was attacked too often by both civilians and shinobi, was not served in all stores and cafes, and had dirty insults thrown at him from behind. If their generation had accepted the fair-haired boy and learned to cooperate with him during joint missions, then such understanding could not be expected from the elders. Sakura decided to watch the training with her own eyes, explaining to herself that she simply wanted to understand what Naruto was going to learn. The training ground where the Hokage and Uzumaki were undergoing special training was protected by a Fuin barrier, dense, impenetrably black, blocking any access to the people inside. She had to give up and retreat, believing that the Yondaime would not harm Naruto, but something inside her drove her forward. The girl walked around the walls for weeks, trying to get behind them, until one day the Hokage called her and asked her directly about the reasons for such persistence. Sakura was forced to voice all her fears and suspicions with shame, admit that she was worried about Naruto, and with tears in her voice asked not to harm him. Probably, this was the most humiliating thing, to ask for something without having any opportunity to influence the decision of the interlocutor. Surprisingly, the Hokage listened to her then. He didn't mock her, didn't brush her off as an absurd, stupid girl, and wasn't offended by her distrust. He explained very seriously that he wasn't going to cripple Naruto, told her an approximate plan for his training, including both physical training and the development of chakra channels preceding the mastering of new techniques, calmly and thoroughly showed her a first aid kit. He explained that the training ground was closed only so as not to harm any of the other shinobi. The techniques studied by Uzumaki could be very destructive if used incorrectly. He calmed her down, assuring her that in the event of serious injuries to his student, he could always immediately move him to the hospital and monitor the progress of treatment. And he thanked her for such concern for her teammate. Sakura then ran out of the office, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Then Sasuke started disappearing. She found herself a personal teacher when she and Sakura had just started to build a friendly relationship. Topics for conversation, common training, and walks around the village appeared. Sakura was completely desperate. Her heart was stabbing with cold needles, her lungs were filled with poisonous bitterness, angry tears appeared in her eyes. Other teams spent a lot of time together, trained joint combat schemes, relaxed and had fun. Haruno saw her teammates only on joint missions, and even then they hardly talked, all the time immersed in their thoughts. Ino was busy either with her team or in the family store. Sakura never had much contact with Hinata and Tenten. Her parents were not interested in her company. Coins were slowly accumulating in her pockets, which there was nowhere to spend. The room was overgrown with towers of read books, and an unpleasant feeling of sucking loneliness had made a nest in her chest. It seemed that this gray streak would never end. And then Uzumaki came. He smiled warmly and sincerely, dispersed the loneliness and fear with his ringing voice, and invited her to a picnic. Not a date, not another mission, not a scheduled training session, just a simple walk with Team 7. The silence cracked like shards of broken glass. Sakura was confused then. She rushed to pack a basket of food, awkwardly knocking over furniture and spilling food, braided her disheveled hair several times, bit her lips and wrung her thin fingers. She was nervous for some unknown reason, embarrassed and ready to burst into tears from relief. Naruto continued to smile softly and look at her, leaning against the doorframe. Her heart was flooded with warm gratitude. She was not alone. They had their first picnic near a river in an inconspicuous area surrounded by dense forest. Naruto immediately rushed to swim. Sasuke took off her clothes and exposed her snow-white body to the gentle rays of the sun. Sakura thoughtfully examined the pebbles under her feet. The Hokage arrived, annoyed that Naruto had missed the planned training. For once he managed to carve out some daytime, and Uzumaki. The Hokage walked through the water to the place where his careless student was splashing, listened to something, stood up even more angry, and then suddenly smiled. He returned to the girls on the shore, threw off his hat and cloak and settled down on the stone bank, pulling a basket of food towards himself. After some time, Kakashi appeared, accompanied by a large bulldog. He glanced at the pastoral picture and, obeying the Hokage's commanding gesture, settled down nearby, joining in on the dinner. Naruto got out, started a playful squabble with Sasuke, which flowed into an argument about how to use powerful techniques in the mountains, and drew the men and Sakura herself into the conversation. The air was torn by ringing laughter, loud screams, and an intoxicating feeling of unity. Emotions mixed into an indescribable cocktail, rocked on waves of tenderness, muscles relaxed, getting rid of wild, painful tension. A couple of hours later, when the sun began to set, Sasuke's black-haired teacher appeared. He looked carefully at those present, took off his raven mask and walked to the water, squatting down. Absolutely silently and harmoniously fitting into the motley company. Sakura remembered that day as one of the happiest and most peaceful in her life. Since then, they gathered in such a strange company 7 more times. Sometimes they all sat peacefully and ate, having leisurely conversations, sometimes they fooled around, sometimes Naruto and Sasuke started training exercises, finding out who of them had learned more. Sakura did not take part. She mostly just kept silent, looking at the people around her, basking in their warmth, absorbing their hidden pain, sharing their loneliness. She became part of a world broken into pieces. Itachi glanced sideways at the thoughtful girl, tearing himself away from his sister's fight for a moment. Such moments were worth their weight in gold in their company. Too rare because of possible malevolent surveillance. Too fragile, since no one explained to their comrades the whole essence of the complex relationships of the participants. Too warm, almost intimate, creating an unreal feeling of family. The connection of lonely people who had gone through a long and difficult path. Itachi was never able to admit to Sasuke that he was her brother. He could not find the right words, although a huge number of them had accumulated in his mouth. Kakashi could not explain why he so strongly did not want to take students and why, in fact, he refused to teach them anything serious. The Hokage did not talk to Naruto. Father and son continued to train together, pretending that they had always known each other, but sometimes such a heavy understatement hung between them that it was time to cut it with a katana. And there was no guarantee that the sharpened blade would not get stuck in the air. Sakura seemed completely unnecessary in their strange circle, an extra link, a distraction, but sometimes Itachi felt that without her the connection could break completely. The only one who knew nothing about the people around her, but accepted them completely calmly, without feeling awkwardness, fear, or alienation. During the rare joint training, the girl mostly lazed around, lying on a blanket and watching what was happening, then invited the tired guys to the blanket and treated them to homemade bento, herbal tea from a thermos, and onigiri. She looked around, looking for something for herself, and did not find it. It is quite possible that the time for her training simply had not come yet. A third fighter in the team is hardly needed. A line of defense? Contact attacks? A medic? Time will tell. Sasuke caught Naruto in genjutsu. The boy froze, trying to escape from the illusory world, jerked to the side, instinctively leaving the line of a possible attack, made a seal. The fox inside him dozed peacefully. Over time, it became obvious that the two somehow communicated with each other, and this communication was very strange. The Nine-Tails did not try to harm its vessel. It did not make any attempts to escape, did not persuade the Jinchuriki to do anything, did not limit access to its power. However, it did not rush to help either. It slept, watched, sometimes quarreled with the Hokage-sama through his son. Uzumaki strained himself, but still managed to send chakra in the right direction. Itachi frowned. He needed to more actively rely on illusions. Sasuke still uses them carelessly. A satisfied laugh was heard. Saburing! A woman passing by jumped to the side in surprise and quickly crossed to the other side of the street. Sakura shook her head disapprovingly. Naruto, stop howling. My head already hurts. Sasuke winced and rubbed her temples. Using the Sharingan for a long time always had a negative effect on her health and mood. And Itachi seemed to have gone wild over the last week. He drove her to use Genjutsu for several hours, demanding some unrealistic results. He's a sensei, why does he even care about Sasuke's success? But I'm bored, Temu. Naruto ignored his friend's displeasure and continued to splash out the accumulated energy by whining. The Hokage hasn't trained with me for a week, they don't give us missions, they forbade us from training on our own. I'm tired of hanging around the village just like that. It's because tomorrow is the Chunin exam. Everyone is busy. Anger still burst out in a too harsh tone. What does that have to do with me? Naruto blinked his eyelashes in confusion. Knowing you, the ban on training seems very reasonable. Participants from other countries have already started arriving. They don't want to be disgraced. Sasuke! Shut up already, Dobe! The boys walked along the main street of Konoha, bickering as usual. Indeed, the village had been flooded with a large number of shinobi from other countries in recent days. Here and there, the protectors of the hidden villages of Grass, Suna, and Sound flashed. Cafes began to serve unusual dishes, strange melodies and voices with an unusual accent sounded. Fights broke out when slightly tipsy people met old enemies, trade agreements were concluded, informal acquaintances were made. The usually calm and measured life of the Hidden Leaf was transformed and seething. The Chunin exams were held twice a year, each time in a different country, chosen by random drawing. Konoha had not hosted guests for several years, so the upcoming event was perceived by most shinobi and civilians as a rare exotic entertainment, an opportunity to have an interesting time. Bets were placed on the number of genin who passed the first test, the draw for fights for the second round, the mortality rate among the new generation, the number of new geniuses and losers. Tickets for the third test were sold out. Life in a state of constant hidden war changed people's perceptions, making them more cruel, indifferent and thirsty for bloody spectacles. Konoha was decorated with posters with photographs of the teams representing the village. The characteristics of the genin known to the average person were passed from mouth to mouth. The chances of winning and losing were discussed. The participants in the exam reacted to such attention in different ways. Some were frightened, some were irritated, and some, on the contrary, were inspired. Naruto didn't care. Used to the wild pace set by his father, he was desperately bored and wanted to find something to do. Ksu. Well, let's do something. For example? Sasuke sighed wearily, resigning herself to her friend's restlessness. Sometimes it was easier to agree with him than to explain why you didn't want to do something. Well, I don't know. Uzumaki ruffled his hair, which had grown noticeably longer in the last 6 months, and threw his hands behind his head. Let's go to a cafe. Uncle Tsuchi said that he had developed a new type of ramen, but I still can't try it. Either I don't have the money, or the time, and after some training sessions my head is so dizzy that I can't even look at narimaki in soup. I immediately start to feel sick. Sakura thought that after some of Naruto's training, even she, an outside observer, was starting to feel sick. On the other hand, a snack wasn't a bad idea. It was getting close to lunchtime, and a fragrant, filling, albeit too fatty, meal would be very welcome right now. Sasuke, apparently, had come to the same conclusion and resignedly turned towards the cafe, cutting through a small courtyard with a small front garden. They hadn't managed to go far from the road when the brunette stopped abruptly, raising her hand up and looking around warily. A thick, dense purple chakra smelling of blood appeared from around the corner of the house. The air trembled noticeably from the tension. Quiet sobs and pleas for mercy were heard. Sakura felt her skin become covered in goosebumps, and cold, sticky sweat ran down her back. Something around the corner inspired an inexplicable horror in her. Sasuke frowned, but still went forward. Naruto followed her. Sakura swallowed hard and forced her stiff body to move. Her team was the strongest in the village, they could handle anything. Around the corner, a terrible picture unfolded, threatening to turn into a tragedy. A red-haired boy with faded turquoise eyes, the kanji for love, on his forehead, a sand protector and a huge pumpkin on his back, from which sand was continuously flowing, loomed over two genin, who, judging by their uniform, had arrived from the land of grass. The boys, lying on the ground, quietly whined in fear, while the sand was increasingly enveloping their bodies, threatening to swallow them completely. The shinobi could no longer move and now looked at their tormentor with horror. Judging by their tense poses and heavy breathing, the sand was not just covering their bodies, but slowly squeezing them, squeezing their insides and preparing to turn them into bloody mincemeat. Sasuke narrowed her eyes. On the one hand, neither the attacker nor the attacked were Konoha members, which meant that what was happening should not concern Team 7. On the other hand, there was something disgustingly wrong about what was happening, going beyond the usual boundaries of cruelty. While the girl hesitated, Naruto grinned strangely, pushed her aside and abruptly jumped forward, moving himself in one fluid movement between the Suna member and the herbalists. He made seals in a vaguely familiar Fuin barrier, building a wall impenetrable to chakra, cutting off the red-haired man from his victims, smiled at the would-be killer as if he were a dearly beloved relative, and hid his hands in his pockets. "Hello? My name is Uzumaki. Naruto. And you?" Uzumaki's voice sounded surprisingly friendly. For Naruto, who rather painfully endured any manifestation of injustice, this was strange and atypical. Sasuke thoughtfully bit her lip. The Tsunite looked angrily at the new opponent with his cold eyes, but the blonde did not show even a shadow of hostility in his direction, calmly continuing to wait for an answer. "What?" The Sandman's voice matched his eyes, steely, indifferent, with a hidden threat. Uzumaki tilted his head to the side and smiled sunny. "I wonder what the name of my fellow sufferer is." Sunovets flinched. He narrowed his eyes, wanted to say something sharp, but obviously swallowed his words. He looked closely at the face, lined with scars, whiskers. He listened to his inner feelings. He saw something in the black eyes of his opponent. He pulled himself together, hiding all emotions. "Dog no Gaara." "Nice to meet you, Gaara." Naruto continued to smile casually, not changing his pose. "Apparently, you're from the hidden sand village. They say you have amazing sunsets. Red as poppy petals. Is that true?" "True." Gaara tensed even more, trying to understand what the other man was getting at. Thick scarlet chakra began to accumulate near Naruto's feet. Sakura felt the same aura of hatred and malice that flowed along the wave bridge, still too weak, but with each passing second it was being filled with more and more power. "Have you seen me in your village before, Gaara?" Uzumaki seemed unfazed by the tension of everyone present. "No." "Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because Sunakagura is your territory," he said harshly, sharply, without even a hint of the former warmth in his voice. Friendliness remained only in his unnatural smile, which had become a grin. "Konoha is mine. Do you get it? We were invited." Gaara copied Naruto's pose, hiding his hands in his pockets. The tension between them grew stronger. Black-violet and scarlet-yellow swirls formed on the ground. "As guests. So behave like guests. Hide your tail before I take out mine." Turquoise clashed with blackness. Sasuke felt her hands begin to shake. It was becoming increasingly difficult to withstand the aggressive ki. For several endlessly long minutes, the boys glared at each other, assessing the situation, the location of their opponents, their own strength. Animal features emerged, the fox's evil grin and the raccoon's devilish grin. Sasuke didn't even realize that her vision had changed. Her natural instincts were activated. Two young men landed silently behind Gaara, a blonde with a huge fan on her back and a guy in a strange suit with a painted face. Both were clearly older, with sand protectors. They froze. Gaara's lips parted in an unpleasant grin. Are you threatening? Let me remind you of the rules of etiquette. Naruto took his hands out of his pockets and spread them in a gesture of peaceful greeting. His voice again showed an incomprehensible warmth and friendliness. You have to help your own. Gaara's eyes widened in surprise. He twitched his cheek as if he had heard something incredible that had thrown him off his usual rut. In the blink of an eye, he summoned the sand back into the gourd and abruptly jumped onto the nearest tree. He looked over his shoulder, peering again into Naruto's face, shook his head like a dog shaking off raindrops, and quickly jumped onto the roof. The boy's face resembled a porcelain mask. He bowed his head and disappeared without saying goodbye. The Sandmen followed their comrade, exchanging surprised glances. Naruto, what was that? Huh? The blonde smiled, helping the disoriented herbalists to their feet. It's okay, Sakura-chan. I was just trying to be polite. Naruto. Fuyu was not in the mood for a joking tone. Shikaku Sasuke. It was Shikaku. Chapter 14. Sasuke woke up first, which was very rare now. She stretched on the bed, driving the drowsiness out of her body, mentally counted to 10, listening to the birds chirping outside the window, and smoothly stood up, looking back at the neighboring bed. Lately, she found it empty too often. Uzumaki slept with his arms spread out to the sides and sweetly snoring. The blanket was crumpled, revealing a strong, sinewy body with an even tan. Naruto had taken to sleeping without pajamas. Sasuke even thought about arguing about this, but kept postponing the unpleasant conversation. It was not that she pitied her too busy comrade, she just did not want to lose his aesthetically pleasing appearance. At least, that's how she explained it to herself. Over the past months, Naruto had changed, gradually moving further and further away from the image of an awkward, angular, and skinny child. Handsome. Slender legs, sculpted chest muscles, smooth skin without a single scar or scratch. Long, fluffy eyelashes. A slightly upturned nose, chapped, clearly defined lips. His hair had grown, making him look like his father. Naruto did not cut it, consciously or not, bringing himself closer to the image of the Hokage. If before the boy, apparently, looked like his mother, now more and more Namake's family traits were appearing. Cheekbones. Eye shape. A mole on the neck. Characteristic gestures and facial expressions. It will take very little time, and people will begin to notice what had been hidden from them for so long. Sasuke's side. Naruto attracted too much unnecessary attention to himself without this. The girl took an invigorating shower with aromatic oils and went to prepare breakfast for two. At first she wanted to do so beloved Uzumaki Tamago, but changed her mind at the last moment. Boiled rice and natto *, they'll need a lot of strength today. No one knew exactly how long the Chunin exam would take, as the tasks were different each time and the time allotted for their completion varied. Hidden villages competed to see who could more accurately and originally determine the strength and abilities of the new generation of shinobi. History knew of cases of tests in mountainous terrain, searching for objects in underwater caves, survival in a desert drenched in the scorching sun. The only thing that remained unchanged was the 3-round scheme theory, obstacle course, and individual sparring. The rest was left to the imagination of the organizing village. There was no excitement. Sasuke was confident in her strength and her team. Sakura caused slight doubts, but she would definitely be able to pass the first 2 stages, and the rest was not so important. Even if the pink-haired girl could not win the sparring, this would not automatically deprive her of her Chunin vest. The results of the 3rd test were assessed according to many criteria, and victory in the fight was by no means the most important condition. General physical training, and the ability to correctly assess the enemy's strength, and the thoughtfulness of the combat strategy were also taken into account. Sakura was prepared enough to cope with this. The sound of water was heard. Naruto woke up and went to take a shower. Sasuke smiled. At such moments, she always wanted to smile. Naruto was there, only hers, and no one could take his attention. On those rare days when they managed to wake up together, the guy was especially gentle, as if trying to compensate for his constant absence and inattention. Homely. Native. Sleepy. He smiled, touched her with his fingertips, kissed her on the cheek. He praised the food, looked at her in such a way that her heart pounded loudly and melted, warmed her with his presence alone. Sasuke's breath caught, his cheeks began to blush, and his head was slightly spinning. Sonny boy. The strongest. The most important. There was no fear next to him. Good morning, Sasuke. Naruto walked into the kitchen, kissed her cheek and mumbled. Thanks for the food. Funny, half asleep. Cozy. Slightly awkward and disoriented. Wet hair stood up in a funny hedgehog. Good. Have breakfast and get ready, the exam starts in an hour. Yes. Sasuke sat down opposite and watched Uzumaki eat with a rare affection. Naruto fidgeted under her gaze. What's wrong, Sasuke? Are you worried? No, everything is fine. Eat. The girl smiled and left the kitchen so as not to embarrass her friend. In the room, Fuyu laid out several sealing scrolls on the bed and began packing the essentials into them: weapons, food for a few days, flasks of water, warm clothes. In principle, all the things had been collected yesterday. All that was left was to put them in the right order. Sealing scrolls were one of the first exercises Naruto mastered in Fuinjutsu. The technique itself was quite simple to perform and was used by almost all shinobi going on long-term missions. The main thing it required from the creator was calligraphic application of hieroglyphs and uniform filling with chakra. Naruto had to sweat a lot before he could master it. The boy was never famous for his good handwriting, perseverance, or perfect chakra control. However, setting himself a specific goal, he went towards it with the persistence of a buffalo, without turning anywhere. Calligraphy began to bend under his iron will after a week of classes, and mastering further seals was easier and faster. Moreover, Uzumaki always managed to introduce something of his own, new and unique, into the already mastered formulas. It was funny, but even the simplest technique of sealing scrolls in his performance looked completely different than the original formulation suggested. The scrolls were smaller, since Uzumaki hated to carry bags. They contained much more items, and kept the products fresh for up to a month. Standard schemes did not provide for such luxury. Personal development, caused by laziness and love for tasty food. Sasuke chuckled. The girl changed her home yukata for a comfortable, spacious t-shirt, pulled on shorts and put on armbands, hiding the Uzumaki mark for Hiraishin no Jizu underneath them. He had put it almost immediately after he learned how, and periodically updated it, pouring in as much chakra as the seal could withstand. To all of Sasuke's objections that there was no need for this, and that she was able to protect herself, he only clenched his teeth and remained silent. Sakura also had such a mark, but it appeared much later and an order of magnitude less chakra was poured into it. Did this mean that Sasuke was more important to Naruto than Sakura? Fuyu didn't know. She would like to believe it, but all of his declarations of love still did not belong to her. Sasuke was just fixing the fishing line in the arm guards when Naruto finally finished breakfast and walked into the room. The blonde quickly changed and began filling his hip bag with three-pronged kunai. He hadn't carried so many of them with him before. Was he still worried? His knowledge of Hiraishin was still a secret. Bypassing the secrets that Yondaime guarded Hokage, no one has ever succeeded. Sasuke frowned. In the last few days she always felt like she was missing something important. Naruto was acting as usual, saying what she expected from him, but in all his actions there was sometimes a hint of tense nervousness. And it was unlikely that it was caused by fear of the exam. The journey to the academy, where the first test was to take place, was accompanied by easy, friendly banter. Sasuke was trying to remember if she had put everything in the scrolls, and Naruto was coming up with new items that they absolutely couldn't do without at this stage. For example, a bathroom, a mirror, and a formal suit. Sasuke hissed, but admitted that Uzumaki's options were truly funny and ridiculous, and her excitement was unnecessary. No matter what the examiners came up with, the guys always had everything they needed with them, their shinobi skills and their heads on their shoulders. Everything else was just a nice added bonus. A decent crowd of onlookers and future participants had already gathered at the entrance to the academy, lining up to hand in their consent forms. There were encouraging shouts, mocking comments, and just memories from the time when the onlookers were genin themselves and had to take a similar exam. The young shinobi snarled weakly, handed in their forms, and walked inside to cheers. Naruto and Sasuke stood at the end of the line when they noticed the third member of their team. Sakura stood slightly apart from the main crowd and cowered under the unfriendly glances of shinobi from other countries. No one had seen her off today. Her parents seemed not to even notice her leaving home, which was offensive and bitter. Her friends from the academy had managed to get inside earlier, and the sensei had not shown up at all. Standing alone was uncomfortable and scary, but the girl tried not to slouch or hide her head. Kunoichi did not behave like that. Sasuke snorted. Sakura always wound herself up too much. Naruto smiled and waved his hand, beckoning her to him. Girls were strange after all. Having submitted their consent forms for the exam, Team 7 went to the third floor. On the second floor, they were enveloped in a light veil of genjutsu, but it was unlikely that such a weak form could stop or confuse those who constantly trained with the born Uchiha. Uzumaki shook himself like a dog and shook his head in bewilderment. It seemed he didn't even really understand that they wanted to detain them. Sasuke rolled her eyes. The guy was in his element. On the third floor, near the necessary office, there was a real crowd. Both familiar faces of guys from their graduating class and new ones were visible. Protectors of hidden villages from all over the world flashed. Speech in an unfamiliar, melodious language sounded. Someone was loudly cursing, someone was trying to figure out a list of supposed questions on the theory, someone was repeating notes from the Beginner's Shinobi Manual out loud. The latter looked especially stupid. Sakura greeted Ino, Choji, and Shikamaru. Sasuke nodded to Hinata and Lee. Naruto shouted a greeting to everyone at once and immediately headed towards yesterday's sandstones, around which a buffer zone had formed. No one wanted to stand next to a shinobi emitting such oppressive chakra. Even his own Kigara's dog was saturated with the heavy metallic smell of blood. His companions did not have such an aura, but had already shown themselves to be impudent, arrogant, conceited people. People like that were not liked in principle, and these were the ones you wanted to avoid. There was something about them that subconsciously inspired fear. The Uzumaki were never interested in trifles like the opinions of the crowd. Gaara grimaced as if he'd eaten a lemon when he saw the blonde approaching. Naruto walked up to him as if nothing had happened, leaned on the railing, and started a casual conversation about the weather, Konoha, and for some reason, zoology. Temari and Kankuro watched in amazement as their younger brother answered this strange boy's questions, through clenched teeth, literally spitting out the answers, but still answering. This was not like Gaara. He never communicated with anyone, he hated all living things, he was a ruthless, cold-blooded killer, but now he was conducting a dialogue. Not just answering, but also asking about something equally unimportant and superficial, although perhaps only those who did not understand what was being discussed seemed so. It was incredible. Last night they still had not been able to get an answer to what kind of Uzumaki this was. Naruto, and why Gaara reacted to him like that. Gaara only ordered them to shut up and mind their own business, vaguely expressing himself about his older relative. Temari choked with anger. Gaara had no relatives except her, Kankuro, and his father, and such disrespect was simply outrageous and unfair. The girl had long dreamed of her younger brother recognizing her, but instead he chose a complete stranger as his interlocutor, dressed like a clown from a fair. The blonde's companions didn't look pleased with what was happening either. Their blue and green eyes were watching closely, recording every movement of the Sandmen. The girls didn't come close, but Temari saw how tense they were. The kunoichi poses could instantly flow into a fighting stance. Their hands were near their weapon bags. The position allowed them to take a position in a split second, cutting Uzumaki off from danger. Funny! Temari chuckled. Another 10 minutes passed in this atmosphere. The crowd was buzzing, Naruto was chatting, his little brother was learning how to conduct a dialogue. The loud voice of the examiner, inviting him into the office, interrupted Gaara's torment. The first stage of the exam was practically no different from the standard tests that the shinobi of the Leaf Village wrote at the academy. Perhaps the only difference could be considered Ibiki's menacing speech, which Naruto successfully listened to, and the large number of observers frozen along the wall. Uzumaki only shook his head. Did the management seriously think that future Chunin would copy from each other? Then why go to the exam at all if you don't know anything? Or are these questions so difficult that you can't answer them on your own? Naruto thoughtfully looked through his paper. It seems like nothing special. This one is simple, here too, the third question even seems stupid. Naruto mechanically put checkmarks in the necessary boxes. The fourth question is written, the basics of the basics. Father made him memorize the list of rules at the very beginning of their classes, and then checked it for another month before each training. The fifth is a task for ingenuity. Suspiciously similar to Itachi's actions on the last mission, Uzumaki pecked out his entire brain until he broke the entire fight down to its components. Of course, they don't write about this in textbooks, but in fact, this is a classic situation that occurs on A-rank missions quite often. Option B, without a doubt. Sixth. There are two options. Naruto would use the first one, but that would be if there was only one. Some kind of incomplete task. What if there are civilians? Or other shinobi? No terrain? Uzumaki rubbed the top of his head. Basically, if we take only the available data as a basis and assume that you cannot obtain any others in a given situation, then. The pen scribbled another answer. So be it. The risk to civilians will be minimal, and everything else will be written off as necessary losses. The seventh question is purely legal, about knowledge and understanding of the laws of the state. Eighth, ninth. Naruto put the pen down and looked around. Everyone's success varied. Some resorted to trickery, trying to copy, some sadly looked at their empty sheet, some enthusiastically scribbled with a pen. Sakura wrote herself leaning low over the table, thoughtfully biting her lip, pink hair cascading down her back and shoulders, green eyes sliding along the lines. Such a concentrated expression suited her surprisingly. Sasuke leaned back in his chair, Tomo swirling in his eyes as he looked at his hands. Sharingan. Apparently, she was tracking his movements while he was writing, in order to reproduce his actions. Rolling up his answers? Unlikely. Comparing them. There he is, wincing and pointing to the number 7. Naruto reread his answer. No, everything is correct here. He spent 2 weeks discussing this issue with his father, Itachi, and Kakashi. Everyone gave a clear answer. Naruto persistently tapped his sheet of paper. Sasuke narrowed her eyes in disbelief, but still corrected something on her sheet. Realizing that the allotted time was not even close to ending, the blonde settled comfortably on the desk and dozed off. He was awakened by Ibiki's loud voice asking if everyone was ready for something. Still not waking up, Uzumaki yelled at the top of his lungs that he was ready. The tension in the room disappeared, giggles were heard somewhere, the participants noticeably relaxed. Sakura closed her eyes in resignation. After all, Naruto was a rare slob. Mitarashi Anko was inimitable. And not even with her provocative behavior, revealing outfit and harsh words, but with some kind of feigned, too artificial cheerfulness, reminiscent of a mask. There was so much falseness in her movements and voice that Naruto could not make out a word from the task at hand. He kept trying to get rid of the disgusting feeling of a snake crawling along his back. When the shinobi began to disperse to the tents set up near the iron mesh, Uzumaki turned to his companions and blinked. I didn't understand anything. Sasuke groaned resignedly and began to retell the essence of the task, while Sakura went to get their scroll. Everything was simple enough. In conditions as close to combat as possible, it was necessary to find a pair for their scroll and get with it to the center of the forest, where the old military base of Konoha was located. 3 days for everything. No restrictions in combat, you can attack any team, regardless of which village it belongs to, no restrictions on mortal combat. The laws of wartime in real mode. Team 7 checked all their equipment once again, hid the scroll of heaven in the depths of the luggage and entered the open gates leading into a dark, gloomy forest. The huge old trees with their massive crowns almost completely blocked out the sunlight, creating a cold, uncomfortable gloom. Fleshy vines hung from thick branches, the ground was covered with a carpet of long, stiff grass, and here and there bright spots of poisonous flowers were visible. Naruto walked ahead of the girls, warily looking around and listening. Invisible insects were buzzing, animals were growling somewhere, and the clanking of weapons of those who had already managed to enter the fight could be heard. The Forest of Death is not just a name. Uzumaki read a lot about this place, heard even more from his father and Kakashi-sensei. The former military base of a completely extinct clan, specializing in the breeding of living weapons. The crazy brains of these experimenters gave birth to terrible monsters, deadly insects capable of destroying a person with their poison, animals several times larger than their normal size and possessing powerful fangs, claws, and developed intelligence, predatory poisonous plants. For some time, all of these experiments were willingly encouraged by the leadership of Konoha, especially during the Second Shinobi War, when Leaf's losses were especially high, but then everything got out of control. The animal world began to evolve on its own and too quickly, killing its creators. A huge territory was completely closed to people and became potentially dangerous for the hidden leaf itself. Its cleansing became a priority. Secret laboratories began to hastily develop poisons capable of stopping mutations and destroying already living carriers. Often, they did not even have time to properly test them and were immediately sent to shinobi teams conducting cleanups. Deadly substances were sprayed through aerosols, absorbed into the crowns of trees, injected into food specially thrown for animals, poured into rivers, poisoning the water. The task was completed, and most of the most dangerous creatures were completely destroyed. Local animals were still significantly larger than their relatives. The flora gave birth to new, unique species of plants used in modern pharmaceuticals. Insects were completely subordinated to the Aburame clan. But nothing happens without consequences. Over time, the poisonous components completely broke down in water, soil, and air, having formulated over many decades a special background that awakens in people their deepest fears and passionate desires. Staying here for more than 5 days meant signing your own death warrant. The effects of intoxication from the air inhaled here took several weeks to heal. The work of collecting medicinal herbs in this place was paid several times more than similar work in any other area. This time Konoha outdid itself, choosing a truly serious test for future chunins, one that would fully test their strength. Forest of Death, before death we are all honest. It is stupid to lie to yourself, being on the very threshold, and perhaps it was here that you could understand whether you are fit to serve your village. Naruto himself did not feel any special changes in himself, but perhaps the reason was his increased regeneration. The girls behind him, although they were brave, clearly felt very uncomfortable. Some rustling and terrible screams were heard behind the bushes. The team reacted simultaneously, taking a fighting stance, back to back, and pointing their weapons in front of them. The screams were repeated, but now it became clear that they sounded somewhat distant. Naruto approached the bushes first, and slightly pushed the branches aside, blocking his view. Right behind the bushes there was a small cliff leading into a long, deep ravine. There were 5 people at the bottom of the ravine, 3 sandmen and 2 of yesterday's herbalists. The 3rd member of the herbalist team would never go anywhere. His crushed, disfigured body lay at Gaara's feet. The sand had tasted someone else's blood after all. Naruto frowned, but didn't even try to rush forward. Sakura, who had come up, screamed loudly, but Sasuke immediately covered her mouth with her palm and hid the girl deeper in the foliage. Horror beat in her blue eyes. Uzumaki bit his lip. Gaara knows Sabaku. Strangely familiar, close, like a long-lost younger brother. Jinchuriki, the one-tailed one, was a year older, but according to his inner feelings he was perceived as a younger relative, and Naruto did not quite understand why. Kurama? Because it's weaker. The fox stood up in the cage, carefully looking at what was happening through the eyes of his carrier. Didn't understand. The 9-tailed fox gave a low growl. You feel like he's younger because he's weaker. We were created equal, but with different personalities, strengths, and growth potential. Shikaka and I never got along. Too impulsive. Too stupid. Pushy. He crushes his hosts and ends up an empty, mindless shell. He's a dead end for himself. So Gaara is also empty? Uzumaki felt his heart ache at the question. Strange, he shouldn't be worried about a stranger. No, idiot. You talk to him. But I don't understand. The fox growled again. Because you're an idiot. When we were free, we were equals, with equal knowledge and skills. Even then, I was stronger than that raccoon. He couldn't win a single fight against me. I easily took both his territory and his prey. And then you humans began to limit our strength, pushing us into cages. We had to adapt, and everyone did it in their own way. Our development changed. Shikaku breaks out due to the influence on the brain of its hosts. It causes constant insomnia, makes them aggressive, hot-tempered, and weak. His control over the vessel is higher than all the Bijou, but his Jinchuriki die too quickly. When he is resealed, he loses years to restore his strength. And you? Kurama watched in silence as Gaara crushed another herbalist. Now Sasuke had to cover his mouth to keep from letting out a treacherous cry. She had never encountered such a cold-blooded murder before. Naruto didn't even flinch, continuing to wait for an answer. I have always been sealed in Uzumaki. You are unique. Your reserve is huge, which allows me to develop my own almost infinitely. You live a long time, and I have managed to accumulate a decent amount of knowledge. You strive for communication. And being reborn inside you does not deprive me of my strength, like everyone else. You're smarter than the other Bijou. It wasn't a question. Naruto simply understood what Kurama was trying to tell him. He was stronger than his brothers and sisters, smarter than them, and therefore he had many times more responsibility. Kurama was responsible for their safety by right of the strong, just as the Hokage was responsible for the shinobi of his village, but he couldn't do anything to help, being locked in a cage. Bijou had already changed, their very nature had changed. They needed their hosts no less than the hosts needed them, and therefore. Are there any cases where a once sealed Bijou remains without a host for a long time or is reincarnated too often? Yes. The last time I saw the three-tailed Isabu was during your mother's mission in the Land of Water. It had almost completely lost its mind. Naruto swallowed hard as he watched Gaara kill the last of his opponents and take the scroll from his hands. He looked at it, decided he needed another one, and sneered, throwing the trophy aside. The Sandmen disappeared from the ravine, leaving 3 mangled corpses behind them. Kurama is responsible for all the Bijou, which means Naruto is responsible for their bearers. No one imposes this responsibility on him, no one will monitor the implementation, but there are things that do not need to be controlled from the outside. Your inner sense of duty is enough. Who knows, maybe this is why he awakened the Rinnegan. Naruto, Sakura sat on the ground, biting her palm until it bled, and choking on sobs. Naruto, why? Quiet, Sakura. The guy came up, squatted down, and stroked the girl's head. Gaara knows Sabaku was within his rights. These are his victims. But you forbade him. Haruno grabbed the orange jacket and pulled the guy towards herself with force. You forbade him to kill. Sakura. I can't forbid him anything. I'm not his father or his older brother, not his Kage, not his daimyo. I can only advise, try to protect him from stupidity, try to protect and guide him. Protect? Protect? The pink-haired girl's voice turned into ultrasound. Why would you protect him? Because I feel responsible for him. Naruto looked her in the eyes seriously. It's hard to explain. Gaara is the Kazekage's youngest son, a year older than us. But in relation to me, he's… I don't know. A younger relative? Nonsense. Sakura jumped to her feet and pushed her partner away from her. The dog, despite the color of their hair, was never related to the Uzumaki. Naruto rubbed his eyes tiredly and stood up. Sakura. Do you know who Jinchuriki are? Sasuke jumped from branch to branch, biting her lip and mechanically dodging the hanging vines. Unpleasant, burning thoughts swarmed in her head. Jinchuriki. She knew, Naruto told her about it back when he found out who his father was. Now it turned out that he learned about the bijou inside himself long before that conversation. Moreover, he communicated with his inner beast, learned to take power from it, asked for advice. It was painful and disgusting. The girl felt betrayed. Why did he keep silent? Why was she so blind that she did not attach any importance to his strange power? As if she had forgotten about it for many years. She wrote off everything to the abilities of the Rinnegan. Without trying to compare the facts, she came up with ridiculous excuses, and the truth was always right in front of her nose. She herself had the Rinnegan. Yes, she hadn't activated it for a long time, being content with the clan jutsu, but she remembered the sensations. Rinnegan didn't give additional chakra, on the contrary, it devoured the existing reserve at a furious speed. Why did Naruto remain silent? Didn't trust her? Didn't consider it necessary? Did he think she wouldn't understand and would push him away? Or was he dancing to the tune of his nine-tailed friend? Sasuke jumped, her foot slipped off the branch. The girl could have held on herself, but strong hands caught her, helped her keep her balance. Her ear was burned by hot breath. He saved your life, Sasuke. Back then, during the eye surgery. Naruto, Uzumaki pressed her tighter. Sasuke, I don't have to listen to the Nine Tails. He can ask me for something, but that doesn't mean I'll fulfill every request. However, the fox has done more for me than all the people of Konoha put together. He saved your life when I put it in danger with my thoughtless actions. And he didn't ask for anything in return. The only way I can thank him now is to not reveal his secret. The Ninetales has shown more than once that he doesn't like it if I tell anyone about him. And I fell silent. Naruto. Sasuke felt like she was about to burst into tears. Either from hurt or relief. I'm sorry. Dry lips touched his temple. The girl froze, watching as Naruto jumped onto the next tree. They made a halt on a small clearing with a cave, when the stars had already appeared in the sky. They lit a small fire, laid out sleeping bags, and decided on the duty shift. There were 2 scrolls in the bag, one of earth and one of sky. Getting the second one turned out to be quite simple. A team from the Earth village turned up. 2 unsure of themselves, timid and already battered in a fight with some beast. They didn't even have to do anything special. The opponents were so exhausted that they gave up the scroll without a fight, for one threat. Naruto thoughtfully looked at the sky. The girls were snoring in their sleeping bags, the lights of the fireflies flickering, the fire giving off a steady, soft heat. He had long noticed that their team was different from the others, even from Konoha. Too mature. Reasonable. Restrained. No one rushed to take the herbalists away from Gaara. No one took pity on the exhausted Earth shinobi. No one complained of fatigue. It had always been like that. They might seem noisy and disorganized, but as soon as it came to carrying out missions, all their lightness instantly evaporated. Maybe it was the only A-rank mission on their list. Maybe it was the fact that they were personally raised by the Hokage, one of the best ANBU and a first-class jounin. Maybe it was the peculiarities of their childhood. Naruto did not know the answer. Usually, the thinking and worldview of genin were formed depending on who their mentor was. This was the calculation when forming teams, even at the academy. Sensei identified the strengths and weaknesses of their students, guided not only by their combat performance, but also by their inner qualities. They got Kakashi Hatake. Kakashi was strange. He did not teach them techniques, kept aloof on missions, and rarely started a conversation himself, but there was something else in him. Something much more important. He did not consider them children. Naruto talked a lot with his captain, listened to his reasoning about friendship, comrades, mutual support. Uzumaki understood them, accepted them, but the problem was different. There were too many strong personalities around Naruto, and Itachi's position was much closer to the boy. Everything for the protection of civilians. You can sacrifice anything, as long as people who are unable to protect themselves live, cross any boundaries, sacrifice any moral and ethical standards. Sometimes Naruto felt disgusted with himself. Wanting to be like Kakashi, he increasingly thought about the need to be like Itachi. The Hokage was a fusion of both points of view, but Naruto could not yet comprehend him, no matter how hard he tried. A shadow fell on his face. Sasuke came over, sat down next to the fire, and pressed herself against his warm side. "What are you thinking about?" Naruto hugged the girl and carefully brushed away a strand of hair that had fallen onto her face. "Tell me, Sasuke. If you were given a choice to save me or a small child, who would you choose?" "Of course you." Fuyu didn't hesitate for a second. Naruto winced and shook his friend. "Are you sure?" "Think again. A defenseless weak kid and an experienced trained shinobi, capable of getting caught only by his own stupidity. Are you experienced?" The brunette chuckled skeptically and raised an eyebrow. "Well, in the future." Uzumaki brushed off her sarcasm, continuing to tensely wait for an answer. Sasuke bit her lip and thought. She looked into the fire and stubbornly shook her head. "You." Naruto sighed heavily and stared at the fire again. Sasuke had never lied to him, but now it felt like she was lying to herself. They sat there for about half an hour when they heard a strange noise from a small river that flowed near their campsite.